So here is one of the pre-recorded segments that will be happening every weekend. I'm gonna start with around 20 to 30 minutes, and it might go longer, but essentially just to have something that can be listened to over the weekend or something just to give smaller updates. 3 things for tonight. One, starting with conservation and the Reptile Expo. So the Reptile Expo was a lot of fun. Got some cool animals there, plenty to see. I mean, just tons of vendors, a lot of people from across Florida, across the country that are interested and passionate in at least keeping reptiles and having, there was other insects there was lizards, there were geckos, all this stuff. And it was obviously for the reptile hobby. It's a lot of just, keeping these animals. And obviously a great event, something that is different from compared to Animal Con, which I noticed. And I think this could be improved across all realms, but there was honestly no mention of animal conservation, wildlife conservation. And obviously the first thing is, hey, it's a Reptile Expo. They're there to showcase, different, caretaking styles or new morphs, or just to show you a wide array of what's in the marketplace. It's not there to be a Sierra Club type of event. On that, the fact is, Animal Con was started obviously by Brian, and he was very passionate about wildlife. Very passionate about wildlife and very passionate about reptiles. And he, before obviously his unfortunate passing, he, and now still in plans, is the aquarium he has and all the reptile stuff in that zoo he's trying to make to bring people closer to animals, to conservation. And when Animal Con, I think it was its 3rd year this year, 3rd or 4th, its primarily focus is obviously enjoying wildlife, but that must be considered with the fact of conserving wildlife and having it for the next generation. So, that's why, just checking up, okay. So that's why even a Reptile Expo, or you go to a zoo, or you kind of all these things, they should be mentioning wildlife conservation, because part of it is if we're taking from the wild, they're taking from animals in the sense of we're breeding new morphs, we're grabbing, obviously now a lot of things are captive born, unfortunately, but we're still taking that, I guess, the idea of having wildlife, breeding it, breeding pets, all this stuff, and then just for the only use of, making money on pets, or just the only use of us enjoying the pets in the confinement of a home. I think it's not bad. It certainly encompasses the fact of enjoying wildlife, but I think it misses the fact of we still have to conserve this while it's here. While we can still take from the wild and have these pets and all this stuff, and it's great, it's fun, it's a great hobby, it's a great way to introduce kids to reptiles, it's a great way to, if someone's kind of, afraid of snakes or afraid of a certain animal, they can kind of slowly be acclimated to a cute baby snake or a cute baby gecko, all this stuff. And what's happening, I guess, if we just ignore and just do that and never mention conservation in that same area, it's kind of, it's not really completing the whole picture, because the only way we had those animals to enjoy in the first place was their existence and their well-being and their populations doing well. And even if it's just in captivity, we can't ignore how the wild side of it is going. So that's something I think that would be interesting to see maybe added or more focused on. Obviously a great conference, and for all I know, maybe every other Reptile Expo or much more have more wildlife focused stuff, but at least for this one, it was a fun time, it was good. But, as in like zoos all nowadays, you go there, it's bam, you're kind of, hopefully, to a degree, being reinforced to the fact that conservation is important, wildlife conservation is important, all this stuff, so we can enjoy it in the future. Whether that's hunting, whether that's to have in zoos, whether that's to make sure we have populations in the wild, which primarily, and we have those things because it's such an important part that if we are enjoying wildlife, we should also protect wildlife. And the second part is, this is kind of moving into what's happening with Florida's amendments. There's a lot of amendments on the ballot for Florida. Amendment 2 is, and I already talked about this, and obviously I'm going from, just experience in wildlife. So you studied in college, all that stuff. Lived in Florida for a bit now. Well exposed to wildlife and nature and stuff in Michigan, and also worked a bit in Michigan politics. Do my own research. I obviously can read efficiently well, at least got me through college, which might not be saying much, but at the conclusion of reading what's already about Amendment 2, it seems too vague. It's literally 2 pieces of paper. It's pretty short for anything political. And it's essentially the right to hunt and fish in Florida. We want to be able to use preferred conservation methods and traditional hunting methods. Again, literally, that is pretty vague. Even if there are, long policy statements and long drawn out things that someone did point out to me that they're apparently gill netting would not be in any way construed by the FWC, the Fish Wildlife Commission, to be now considered as a traditional hunting method that we can use, because apparently there's some other paper somewhere that says, bam, no, we'll never use that. And yeah, that's where this whole legislation seems vague or overly vague. It seems like a really good promise, but it would be one thing if it instead was the right to hunt and fish in Florida by bringing back these traditional methods and these preferred conservation methods. Specifically, even if it wasn't, let's say, to bring back stronger conservation methods that aligned with, limiting the use of development on lands near state parks, which would be a good idea. That would be a more serious, strict thing that could put as an outline to future policy. If they're talking about traditional stuff, they could say, we want to enshrine the protections for, let's say, the indigenous peoples of Florida and their hunting methods. And that's one of the, that's where there does seem to be some support for this amendment too, because it would obviously, on paper, looks like a good thing for indigenous peoples that have been in Florida, that obviously have a way of life. Obviously things are different in the modern age. The same tools aren't exactly used, but still respecting that culture, that identity. Is that really reflected in a very vague bill or a very vague piece of paper to put in a new amendment? No. And even on the part of, could the FWC already have all these rules about what they're not going to allow the gill netting, or these preferred methods can be good for conservation? Let's say that's the case. There is also the case of a permanent easement in Florida. And this is many parts of the country, but in Florida, there's a permanent easement, which, make sure, okay. I mean, he's paying attention, so yeah, he's staring. He knows what's up. But, there's perpetual easements in Florida. And that is essentially you put on a piece of land, the landowner agrees, obviously a bunch of other stuff, essentially saying, and there's different realms of them, but generally we're not going to be able to develop this segment of land because we don't want to. That's going to be protected in perpetuity, and blah 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 blah. Bam! It's kind of a stamp, a seal on a piece of land that says this is not eligible for X, Y, Z. And in the name, perpetual easement would kind of, you don't need to be a college graduate or someone on the Fish and Game Commission or someone in our esteemed Department of Environmental Protection to know that means it's going to stay that way for perpetuity, hopefully forever. Even though at Split Oak, a park in Orlando, Orlando is a expanding metropolis. It's already, Orlando is not what it once was. And yes, progress is good, homes are good, all this stuff, but you also have a sprawl of Orlando that's kind of fading out, that's falling apart. And then you have these new sprawls popping up, and it's all kind of disconnected. It's a very wide, weird laid out city. But anyhow, they wanted to put a road straight through that straight through that park, breaking this perpetual easement, and they were able to, and this is currently going on. This wasn't something that was stopped and delayed. This wasn't oh my gosh, you caught us, we're sorry, we're gonna go back to the drawing board. This was, oh yeah, we're gonna, there's this one section where we can, adjust this over here, it's perpetual, but maybe and bam. Now we have a perpetual easement being stripped, literally just stripped of its meaning, literally just emptied out. So that doesn't make sense. So when these valid points that are brought up that say, hey, gill netting or this thing, it's going to be, just because this amendment is vague doesn't mean that the Fish and Wildlife Commission doesn't have extensive, policy binders or regulation binders on this stuff. Sure, but, and we've also seen the Florida Department of Environmental Protection go out and try to build state parks try to build golf courses and lodges on the actual state parks, which to me, Florida Department of Environmental Protection doesn't really seem to be in line with the mission there. If it was the Florida Department of Tourism expanding by building golf courses and lodges into our remaining wild areas, that would make sense. Then it'd be, okay, well, that would make sense why they want to do that. Which might have to be their new name anyhow. Okay. He's good, don't want him to fall. But, or smash the wall into the wall, but he's good. Again, and I'm right here. This is some of the stuff from Africa. Obviously, this is an alligator skull, not from Africa. It just looks cool up here with a cock skull. Got the pictures here with the kudu running. It's the group. It's the cheetah, but and the spears and all that stuff. So, was a fun time. Back to So essentially, can we trust the state Fish and Wildlife Commission, all this stuff, to actually abide by the words that they've written in these, very staunchy and very esteemed policy briefings and policy manuals and policy binders and all this stuff. So that's where it seems a little sketchy. And so on this last part, I'm working on a more short and concise video to put out about this. But instead of a vague amendment to hunt and fish, traditional methods, but that one we just talked about, there should be an amendment to the Florida Constitution for the protection of our wild lands through rewilding, increasing the barrier of use for wetland banking and land banking. I'll explain that. Auditing the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and others, such as the water management, the South Florida Water Management District. Also, you could do the state parks, just in general, just audit the state parks, see what's going on, and as a checking government. And the last one is state funds towards more conservation initiatives and awareness on what's going on in Florida with our destruction of our remaining wild areas. So these kind of 4 points. 1, rewilding, limiting the use of land banking or increasing the barrier of it, auditing parts of the government, and then education and awareness, all this stuff. An amendment like that to essentially strengthen the fact of we have a Florida right now, which is expanding. It's more people are coming in. We have parts of Florida that are abandoned. We have parts of Florida that are being neglected. We have parts of Florida, there's it's a guy on Instagram. His name is Matt something. I'll have to tag or reference him later. But he kind of pointed out, even during the hurricane, there was like parts of flooding, or there's this contaminated phosphate plant, one of the reservoirs or something essentially got too full, and it's, literally filled with chemicals and stuff that are meant to be held there. And during the hurricane, they're just, we got to release it. Here we go, bam. And even if it's justified, the fact that it's still there and just, bam, we can just release it, seems a bit concerning. And so there's many instances like this where we have a Florida that's not, it's not even like the government is fighting attempts to strip the wild places of Florida. Yes, they are on many sides, but we have so many frontal attacks this year that seem to be really just, if you're that bashful about it and you don't really worry about repercussion, just like, we want to add golf courses and lodges, or we want to, there's a big reserve up in northern Florida, and they essentially deemed part of it as surplus wildland, so they could swap that to build another, I think, a golf course actually. So this weird deeming of surplus, it just does not seem like places in Florida or places of government in Florida are actually leading the state of Florida, and as the will of the people who I think, if you look at how fast the outrage over what they've been doing this year, different parts of the government have been doing this year in regards to wildlife, how quickly the outrage spread online, how quickly they were organized protests, how quickly people were just sharing their own personal experiences in these state parks or wildlands with, photos, videos of their own. The bridge of social media allows this connection, allows more, loads of information to be shared than ever before. And so the fact of how quick that was, how widespread it was, I think if you literally sat down with every Floridian and was like, do you support a mainstream amendment to protect the remaining wild areas of Florida from destruction, development, and waste? Honestly, I think that'd be a very overwhelming reaction. Auditing the government isn't a political thing on either aisle. It's the fact that we have a government that if you can't do your job, like if you're at work or if someone's working for you and they're not doing their job or you're not doing your job correctly, someone wants to know why. Someone wants to find out what's going on to fix it, get you back working, or fire you. That's how it goes. So that's kind of something I think must come up, must be cemented, must be brought by Floridians for Florida. It must be brought up by Floridians for Florida, for wild Florida, to protect all of Florida from it disappearing forever. So that's kind of main three things tonight. Wanted to touch on. Again, Tuesday there should be a live stream as well. 9 p.m. That one, the topic will be announced then. And I look forward to seeing you then. And thank you. Please subscribe. And obviously check out the TikTok and Instagram. TikTok and YouTube are both Sergey Running Wild. Instagram is just Sergey.Kelly. So thank you for tuning in. And this is, I think, ways and steps we can conserve more Florida, conserve more wildlife, and move forward to a wild Florida where we all have more access to it and there's just more of it to enjoy.